ticking of the kitchen clock broke the monotonous silence that had settled over the dining table. I stared at the plate in front of me, the lasagna now turning my stomach. Clink of forks against porcelain was the only sound echoing in my ears. Rowan sat across from me, his eyes darting away from his plate with every bite. I knew he was hiding something. Over the past few months, Rowan's arrivals home had grown erratic, his smiles forced. When he touched me, it felt like a reluctant duty. But what unsettled me most was the strange coldness that came with his presence, there yet not there. My gaze drifted to his phone. Sat on the edge of the table, face up. A notification light blinked on and off. Could have seemed like a small, insignificant motion, but something inside me snapped in that moment. I picked up the phone. My finger hovered over the screen, and Rowan didn't even notice. He was so at ease, it must not have crossed his mind that his secret could be exposed. When I tapped the screen, it unlocked. And there it was. I can't wait to feel you inside me again. Beneath the message, a name, Elena. For a split second, my eyes refused to process the words. I must have misread it. But no, it was there. Real. And it twisted in my gut like a knife. I set the phone back on the table slowly, my eyes locking onto Rowan. He still hadn't noticed, focused on shoving the last bite of lasagna into his mouth. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the rage rising within me. Should I say something? Or wait, let him dig his own grave? Rowan finally looked up, his eyes scanning me. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he said, setting his fork down. In that moment, I made a decision. Keeping my voice as steady as I could, I slid the phone toward him. His eyes dropped to the screen. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. But the panic on his face arrived before any explanation. "Cora, I can explain this." A laugh bubbled up inside me, but I didn't let it out. I wasn't going to let him make a fool of me. I placed my hands on the table, clasping my fingers tightly together. "How long?" My voice was ice. Rowan swallowed hard. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape. Finally, his shoulders slumped, and the words that fell from his lips confirmed a truth I'd already guessed. 6 months. 6 months. For 6 months, the man who told me "I love you" every night had been in another woman's bed. Had I done something wrong? Or had the man I loved been a liar from the start? I couldn't lose myself in those thoughts. I had to be strong. I couldn't let his betrayal crush me. I stood up slowly. Rowan shifted, starting to rise too. "Cora, please. Listen to me." My eyes locked onto his. I didn't recognize him anymore. The man I thought I knew had been replaced by a stranger. "I don't need someone to listen to me." My voice was firm and sharp. "But let me tell you something, Rowan." I leaned down and grabbed my bag. "If you're still here when I get back, then you'll really have something to listen to." I opened the door and stepped out. Cold air hit my face, but it didn't extinguish the fire burning inside me. This wasn't the start of my destruction. It was the beginning of my rebirth. The wind lashed at my skin as I stepped outside. The silence of the night couldn't quell the anger echoing inside me. My steps were hard, my breathing uneven. I kept repeating to myself, "It's over. Everything's over." But was it really? Did a relationship end because of one betrayal, or was that betrayal just the blow that finally opened my eyes? Was this the breaking point that showed me the life I thought I knew for years was nothing but an illusion? I walked along the street, my feet dragging me somewhere without knowing where. I needed to get away, to clear my head. But where? A hotel. Yes, that made the most sense. I wasn't going back. Not to that house, that table, that betrayal. I couldn't step foot there again. With my bag in hand, I entered the nearest hotel. The receptionist looked at me with sleepy eyes. The rage inside me still burned, but my voice had to stay calm. A single room. I don't know how many nights I'll stay. He didn't ask questions, just took my ID and processed the booking. When I got to my room, I closed the door behind me, leaned my back against it, and exhaled. Silence crashed over me. Cold, soulless emptiness of a hotel room. A feeling I hadn't felt in months began to rise within me, loneliness. I realized I'd been alone in my own home for a long time. Long before Rowan's betrayal, I'd been living by myself in that house. His love, his attention, it had drifted away from me ages ago. I'd ignored it. I hadn't wanted to admit it. I walked into the bathroom and looked in the mirror. My eyes were red, my face pale. I was staring at a stranger. Cora, what have you become? All this time, I'd been the one fighting for this marriage. And him? He never fought. He hid, he ran, he lied. Long before he cheated, he'd abandoned our marriage. My eyes slowly locked onto my reflection. That night, Rowan had tried to destroy me. But this wasn't his story. This was mine. I picked up my phone. My first call would be to a lawyer. My second would be to find out who Elena was. I didn't sleep all night. In the dim light of the hotel room, my mind replayed Rowan's betrayal from every angle. I thought about our early days, how his laughter used to fill me with trust, the life we'd built together. And then that message. That single sentence. I can't wait to feel you inside me again. The moment I closed my eyes, those words carved themselves into my brain, gnawing at me. Elena. I didn't know who she was, but I had to find out. I wouldn't shed a tear. Rowan didn't deserve that. I wouldn't cry for him. I'd turn this gut-wrenching betrayal into a source of strength. I'm Cora. I don't break. Dawn, I picked up my phone. My first task was to find a divorce lawyer. I needed someone relentless and ruthless, someone who could make Rowan pay for his betrayal with justice. I opened a search engine and started researching the best divorce attorneys. Olivia Carter. The reviews were clear, smart, cool-headed, fearless. Exactly who I needed. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the third ring. Olivia Carter. Her voice was patient but commanding. My name's Cora Sullivan. My husband cheated on me and I want to ruin him. A brief silence followed. Then Olivia spoke. Come to my office at 11 this morning. I'd like to hear your story. I hung up, took a deep breath. This was just the beginning. But I wasn't done yet. Now it was time to find out who Elena was. I opened Rowan's messages on my phone. I scanned through them. He hadn't texted Elena often. I knew that because he was meticulous about privacy. But when someone's cheating, leaving no trace is impossible. And I would find those traces. I had access to Rowan's bank accounts on my phone. His business card, his personal card. I checked his transactions. And there it was. Over the past 4 months, a recurring charge, Beaumont Hotel. It was a luxury hotel. Rowan and I had gone there a year ago to celebrate our anniversary. But I hadn't set foot in it since. So why had Rowan been paying for it repeatedly? A stone settled in my stomach. Was this where Elena lived? Or where Rowan took her? There was only one way to get answers. I had to go there. I put my phone down, looked at myself in the mirror one last time. My eyes no longer belonged to a fragile woman. I wasn't Cora Sullivan anymore. I was the protagonist of a revenge story now. When morning came, an indescribable heaviness weighed on me. Today was the day I'd face the truth. Before leaving the hotel room, I stood in front of the mirror. The woman who'd looked back at me last night wasn't the same one staring now. Doubt, pain, and anger had merged in my eyes, forging something new, resolve. My marriage was in ruins. While Rowan had claimed to build a life with me, he'd already been living another one. And now I wouldn't just know it, I'd uncover every detail. For a man so skilled at hiding his secrets to think he was flawless was his mistake. But I'd find those flaws. Beaumont Hotel. Place was luxurious and ostentatious. As I stepped inside, high ceilings, gold-trimmed decor, and the scent of expensive flowers greeted me. Rowan and I had come here a year ago, back in the days when I still thought he belonged to me. Now it was a place fused with his betrayal. The woman behind the reception desk smiled at me. "Play the part, Cora. Look strong." I took a deep breath and spoke in my most natural tone. "Hi, I'm here to get some information about a reservation under Rowan Sullivan's name. I'm planning a surprise, but I can't remember the details." She tapped a few keys on her keyboard, then looked up. "I'm sorry, ma'am, we can't share guest information." "Oh, really?" "We'd see about that." I pulled my phone from my bag and opened one of his credit card statements. I turned the screen toward her. "This is one of the recent charges my husband made here. I know he's been staying. He said he was planning a surprise for me but didn't give me the details. I just really need your help." She hesitated for a moment. I narrowed my eyes slightly and flashed a faint smile, making my lie seem plausible. People couldn't usually lie outright, but they were prone to believe a good story. The woman finally glanced back at her screen and spoke in a near whisper. "Mr. Sullivan has been staying here regularly over the past few months. He usually takes Suite 507. Suite 507. The words echoed inside me. It was tangible proof of Rowan's betrayal, a truth that slapped me across the face. She added one more thing. "But he usually wasn't alone." My throat tightened. I knew that, but hearing it hit harder than guessing ever had. "Do you know anything about the woman he was with?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. She shook her head slightly. "We can't share personal details, but some of the staff have said her name's Elena." Elena. Finally, I could put a face to the name. But I couldn't rush this. I needed more information. I thanked her and stepped away. Back in the lobby, I scanned my surroundings. If Rowan came here often, the hotel staff would be familiar with his face, and Elena's. If I stayed here long enough, someone would slip up. And I was ready to wait. I sat quietly in the hotel's sprawling lobby. Light from the ornate chandeliers reflected off the marble floors. Around me, people went about their lives, dragging suitcases in and out. But I had only one purpose, to follow the trail. Rowan and Elena had met here for weeks, maybe months. The staff knew them, and people always talked. Suite 507, mentioned by the first clerk, kept circling in my mind. How many times had Rowan brought Elena there? How much time had they spent together? How often had they laughed together right here in this lobby where I now sat? The thought alone turned my stomach. But I wouldn't let myself unravel. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. It was 10:45 a.m., 15 minutes until my meeting with Olivia Carter. I needed to make one more move before leaving the hotel. I returned to the reception desk. The woman I'd spoken to earlier was gone, replaced by a young, energetic man. Time for a different approach. I took a deep breath, smiled, and leaned toward the desk. "Hi. This might sound a little weird, but my best friend stayed here a while back with her boyfriend and kept raving about room 507. I'm planning a surprise for her, but I can't quite remember the details. Could you tell me what the suite's like?" He raised an eyebrow slightly, but then grinned and glanced at his screen. "Oh, 507's a great one. It's got a big terrace, a huge jacuzzi. Honestly, it's one of our most popular suites." Terrace. Had Rowan and Elena stood out there, gazing at the city? Had they smiled at each other late at night, clinking champagne glasses, their hands brushing? I bit my lip, shoving the images down. Couples staying here must really love that room. He laughed. They do. Actually, one of our regulars was obsessed with it. He leaned in a little. Rowan Sullivan. Does that name ring a bell? My breath caught. They knew him. I forced myself to relax, letting out a playful smirk and shaking my head. Maybe. What was he like? He shrugged. Good tipper, charismatic guy. The woman with him, she was stunning. Always dressed to impress. I think her name was Elena. Or maybe Elena. Not sure, but they both stayed here a lot. Elena. Everyone seemed to know her now. So when would I? Are they here now, you think? I asked, feigning innocent curiosity. He shook his head. Nah, I doubt it. Their last reservation was sometime last week. But they come around often. The fire inside me flared brighter. So they'd made this place a habit. I took a deep breath. Thanks, you've been really helpful. He nodded with a smile, and I walked out of the hotel with quick steps. Now I knew Rowan and Elena had turned this hotel into a second home. They came here regularly, and the staff recognized them. But I still didn't know who Elena was. I had to find out. Everything. And Olivia Carter would give me the tools to make that happen. Olivia Carter's office was on the 14th floor of a downtown skyscraper. When I walked in, a woman in a dark suit greeted me, her sharp eyes scanning files spread across her desk. Her gaze flicked to me for a second before she gestured to a chair. Cora Sullivan, right? I nodded and sat down. Olivia closed her files and turned to me. Betrayal? How long have you known? Since last night. My voice didn't waver. I had to stay strong. She narrowed her eyes. So, do you want a divorce or revenge? Question echoed inside me. Revenge. But how far was I willing to go? Both, I said, steeling my voice with determination. Olivia nodded. You're in the right place. She opened a notepad in front of her. First, I'll dig into Rowan's financial records, properties, and income. Are you sure you know everything about him? I can tell you everything I know. But it's clear he's been hiding a lot from me over the past year. If he has other accounts or secret spending, I want to find out. Olivia tapped her pen against the paper. Got it. And what about the other woman? Elena. Suppressing my anger, I said, I want to know who she is. Where she lives, where she works. How she got into Rowan's life. Olivia gave a small, approving smile. I like you, Cora. She opened a drawer and pulled out a card. This is the number of a private investigator I work with. James Holloway. Quiet, careful, and damn good at his job. I looked at the card. Private investigator. This could change the game entirely. Holding the card, I met Olivia's gaze. How soon can he get information? Depends on how well Rowan and Elena have covered their tracks. But we'll have something within a few days. I nodded. It was worth the wait. I stood up. Olivia extended her hand, and I shook it. This is a war, Cora, she said, locking eyes with me. And I'll make sure you win. A strange sense of relief washed over me. I wasn't alone anymore. As I walked out, I slipped the card into my pocket. The war had officially begun. As I left Olivia Carter's office, I gripped the card in my pocket. James Holloway. That name was no longer just a name to me. If I wanted to uncover the truth about Rowan and Elena, I wouldn't find anyone better than this man. Walking down the sidewalk, an odd restlessness churned inside me. What I learned next could completely upend my world. But there was no turning back now. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the card. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Holloway. I took a deep breath. Mr. Holloway, my name's Cora Sullivan. Olivia Carter told me to contact you. A brief silence hung on the line. Then his tone softened. If Olivia gave you my number, it must be serious. Where do you want to meet? Somewhere safe, I said, trusting my instincts. He let out a faint chuckle. I'm good at safe places. Meet me at Blackwood Cafe in an hour. Then the line went dead. Blackwood Cafe. I knew the place. Small, dimly lit, and usually unassuming. I hadn't met James Holloway yet, but I was already getting a sense of what kind of man he was. And I liked it. Blackwood Cafe. When I stepped inside, the smell of coffee and freshly baked bread hit me. In the corner, a man in a gray coat with hard, piercing eyes caught my attention. James Holloway. Our eyes met, and he gave a slight nod, inviting me to his table. As I sat, he pushed his coffee cup aside and cut straight to the point. Tell me your story, Cora. The resolve in his voice caught me off guard. I hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and dove in. My husband's cheating on me, I said. But it's not just a fling. It's been going on for a while. Rowan Sullivan. He owns an architecture firm, financially well off. His lover, Elena. I don't know how long she's been in his life, but this might be serious. Holloway listened without taking his eyes off me. What do we know about Elena? So far, just her name and that she's been staying with Rowan at the Beaumont Hotel regularly. He nodded slightly, pulling a small notepad from his pocket and jotting something down. We'll uncover their whole relationship, movements, accounts, everything. I leaned toward him. How fast can you figure them out? He raised an eyebrow faintly. You're impatient. Course I was. Holloway paused, then spoke with gravity. The first 48 hours are critical. If Rowan's careful, he'll try to leave no traces, but no one's perfect. If he's kept this woman in his life for over a year, he's left a trail somewhere. My heart raced. And Elena? He fixed his gaze on me. What do you want to know about her? Something boiled inside me. Everything. Holloway nodded. I'll take care of it. He stood from the table. You'll have my first report in 24 hours. I narrowed my eyes. How are you going to do that? He smirked. My job is about not asking the wrong questions. The right ones always get answers. And then, just as quietly as he'd arrived, he slipped out of the cafe. As I watched him go, a spark of real hope flickered inside me for the first time. This meant the hunt had begun. When I returned to the hotel, I was exhausted, but I knew sleep wouldn't come. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. What if Elena wasn't just a mistress? What if Rowan had bigger plans with her? Past midnight, my phone rang. The screen read James Holloway. I answered immediately. What did you find? Holloway's voice was grave. Rowan has a second home. My blood ran cold. Where? I whispered. Outside the city. A small, luxury apartment. But that's not the most interesting part. I sat on the edge of the bed. Go on. I heard the rustle of paper. Rowan bought this place exactly 10 months ago. And guess who's been visiting that address frequently? My throat went dry. Elena. Holloway's voice dropped lower. Elena and a small child. My breath stopped. The room around me suddenly felt meaningless. A child? I shot to my feet, pacing back and forth. How is this possible? Holloway stayed silent. I squeezed my eyes shut. Rowan didn't just have an affair with Elena. He had a child with her. My knees trembled. I sank into a chair and took a deep breath. Holloway's voice came again. Cora, did you want to know this? I opened my eyes. There was no turning back now. I didn't hire you just to find out what I wanted to know, Holloway. My voice hardened. I want the whole truth. My phone in hand, I struggled to breathe. A child. Rowan had a child with Elena. A child I didn't know about, one he'd hidden from me, but one that was his. This wasn't just betrayal. It meant my entire life had been a lie. While I'd spent years trying to preserve a marriage, he'd been building another family. I gripped the arms of the chair so hard my knuckles whitened. The wave of rage coursing through my veins was so fierce it felt like my blood was boiling. Calm down, Cora. I needed to stay calm. But how? With a sharp exhale through my nose, I turned back to the phone. Holloway, I want you to find out everything about that child. Name, age, birth date. Holloway went quiet for a moment, then spoke slowly. Cora, this is stepping into a whole different realm. If Rowan's really been hiding this from you, have you thought about how it'll feel to know? I tightened my grip on the phone. Don't ask me that. I need to know. He sighed. All right. But this morning, you might want to go see that apartment with your own eyes. I narrowed my eyes. The address. I'll text it to you. But be careful, Cora. Sometimes when we learn the truth, we wish we could go back to not knowing. When he hung up, the anger inside me kept growing, silent but razor sharp. There was no turning back. The war was starting now. Early that morning, I set out for the address Holloway had sent me. Rowan's secret apartment was just outside the city, in a luxurious but secluded neighborhood. Gated gardens, private security entrances. I could see now how he'd kept this place hidden from me. For a few minutes, I gripped the steering wheel tightly. The anger and uncertainty tangled inside me, searing my mind. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. It was time to act. As I walked toward the building, each step made me feel stronger. I entered the elevator, glancing at the floor and apartment number Holloway had given me, 7th floor, apartment 706. My heart pounded in my chest. When I stepped into the hallway, I stared at the door ahead. This was where Rowan's second life unfolded. I approached the door, narrowing my eyes. I breathed quietly and listened. A sound. The laughter of a small child. In that moment, my throat tightened. I clenched my fists and held my breath. This was the truth. Elena had a child with Rowan. And that child was behind this door right now. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. What would I do? Knock? Turn back? But before I could decide, the door swung open. And there stood Elena. Her eyes locked. It was the first time we'd ever seen each other. But we both knew exactly what we were standing in the middle of. Elena. She was even more beautiful than I'd imagined from photos. Long, wavy brown hair, wide hazel eyes, flawless skin. She wore a cozy sweater and jeans, the picture of casual domesticity, a normal life. But that life had been built with my husband. Elena's eyes narrowed in shock at first, then her lips parted. You're Cora. She knew me. Course she did. I nodded sharply. And you're Elena. She froze in the doorway. She didn't run. She didn't look away. 'Cause she knew there was nowhere to hide. A small voice came from inside. A child's voice. Elena, are you there? My entire body turned to stone. I caught a flicker of panic in Elena's eyes. That's when I understood. This was a secret she'd been trying to keep. My gaze locked onto hers. Is there something you want to tell me? Elena took a breath, and the shock on her face gave way to a hard expression. She was defiant. Let's sit and talk, Cora. That wasn't what I'd expected. I'd braced myself for arguments, denials, tears. But this woman chose to face me head-on. I furrowed my brow and crossed my arms over my chest. Why? Rowan's been lying to me all this time. Are you going to lie to me too? Elena inhaled deeply, then shook her head slowly. No. But are you sure you're ready to hear it? And in that moment, everything shifted. The threshold, Elena and I locked eyes. It was the first time I'd seen her, yet it felt like we'd known each other for years. Because, without even realizing it, she'd been the central figure in the darkest chapter of my life. And now, this woman standing before me was ready to tell me something. She took a step back. Opening the door wider, she glanced inside. Can you wait a few minutes? She asked in a low voice. I understood immediately. She was sending the child away. I just nodded. She closed the door gently. As I stood silently in the hallway, muffled voices came from within. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Come in. I hesitated for a moment. This was her and Rowan's hidden world. But I was done being the one lurking in the shadows. If I wanted the truth, I had to see it all. I stepped inside. When I stepped into the apartment, the first thing I noticed was the warmth. There were no family photos on the walls, but everything felt like a home. A large sofa in the living room, toys scattered across the floor, a stack of children's books piled in the corner. This was a nest. A punch landed in my gut. Rowan hadn't just used this place for an affair. He'd built a life here. Elena moved toward the kitchen. Would you like some coffee? There was an odd calm in her voice, as if she wanted to repay a debt to me. No, I said sharply. I want you to tell me the truth. I sat on a stool at the kitchen counter, clasping my hands tightly together. Start. Elena leaned against the counter, her gaze steady as she took a deep breath. I met Rowan 3 years ago. My throat tightened. 3 years. So this wasn't just a months-long betrayal. It was a calculated, long-hidden lie. Elena continued. I didn't know he was married. At first, he told me he was single. I believed that for a long time. There was a faint tremor in her voice, but her expression remained firm. She wasn't lying. How did you find out? I asked. Her eyes flickered to the floor for a moment. Then she straightened slowly. When I got pregnant, my entire body turned to stone. Everything inside me wanted to scream and shatter in that instant. When? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Elena lifted her head. 2 years ago. 2 years. For 2 years, Rowan had climbed into bed with me while knowing this woman was somewhere else, giving birth to his child. And he hadn't said a word to me. Elena went on. When I told him I was pregnant, he was shocked at first. But then he didn't leave me. She laughed, but there was no joy in it. He said he loved me. That things with you were over. That one day I'd be happy with him and I just needed to be patient. I dug my nails into my thighs. So, you thought he'd leave me? She nodded slowly. Yes. And I believed him. Silence stretched between us. Inside me, a massive wave of anger, frustration, and heartbreak churned together. It was so absurd. Rowan had convinced us both of the same lie. I fixed my eyes on Elena. So what happened? Why is he still with me? Elena gave a bitter smile and shook her head. Because Rowan's a two-faced man. He never fully committed to leaving you. He kept asking for time. Kept putting things off. Her eyes narrowed. But when he realized I truly loved him, his attitude toward me changed. She took a deep breath. Cora, Rowan only ever saw me as a fling. But when I fell for him and ruined my life, he couldn't cut ties completely. Because in his eyes, I was supposed to stay just a secret. In that moment, everything clicked in my mind. Rowan wanted to live two lives. He didn't want to let me go because, to him, I was the official wife. He didn't want to let Elena go either because, to him, she was a passion, a hidden game. But things had changed. 'Cause when Elena gave birth to his child, the game became real. Suddenly, my hatred shifted, not toward Elena but toward Rowan. This woman had been deceived. Just like me. For a few minutes, I said nothing. A knot twisted in my stomach, but the rising fury inside me drowned out everything else. Then I stood up. Elena's eyes locked onto mine. What are you going to do? I turned to her. I'm going to use the truth against him. She frowned. How? I smiled coldly. I'm going to turn Rowan's life into hell. In that moment, a plan began to take shape in my mind. I was no longer just a betrayed woman. I was a woman out for revenge. This man had stolen years from me. He'd promised me a life, then turned around and built another one behind my back. And now I'd ruin his. First step? Catch him off guard. I turned to Elena. Tonight, when Rowan gets home, I want you to send him a message. Her eyes widened. What should I say? I pulled out my phone, opened the messaging app, and carefully chose my words as I typed them onto the screen. Rowan, I met Cora. I know she knows now. It's time for you to decide. Which one of us? Elena swallowed hard as she read the screen. Then she looked at me. Are you really going to do this? My answer was unwavering. This is just the beginning. The screen of the phone in Elena's hand glowed with cold white light. The message was still there. Unsent but ready to go. Rowan, I met Cora. I know she knows now. It's time for you to decide. Which one of us? Elena looked up at me. There was worry in her eyes, but something else too. Acceptance. For a moment, I thought about how expertly Rowan had manipulated both of our lives. He'd been a puppeteer, pulling strings from behind the scenes. But now the roles were about to reverse. Should I send it now? Elena whispered. Ticking of the clock echoed in the silence. I shook my head slowly. No. We're going to plan this first. Elena frowned. What do you mean? I crossed my arms over my chest. I want to make Rowan panic. But before we corner him completely, I need to see his moves. Her eyes narrowed slightly. So we're testing him? I smiled. Exactly. Elena took a deep breath and set her phone on the table. How? I pulled out my own phone and stared at Rowan's name for a long moment. Then I typed my own message. You're coming home for dinner tonight, right? We need to talk. Elena's eyes widened in shock as she read it. You're inviting him over? I shrugged. If we want to know what he's thinking, the best way is to watch him up close. I want to see how far he'll try to deceive me. He still thinks he's holding the strings. But in reality, we've changed the rules of the game. And I pressed send. The moment I set the phone on the table, a weight settled in my stomach. Rowan's response would reveal how prepared he was. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Finally, the screen buzzed. Of course. I'll be there after work. I love you. Smiley face. The words turned my stomach. He loves me? I handed the phone to Elena. Her face tightened as she read it. Classic Rowan, she said in a hard voice. Acting like nothing's happened. I nodded. He still thinks he can fool us. But tonight, that illusion would end. I returned to the hotel. Standing in front of the mirror, I stared at myself for a long time. Tonight, I'd sit at the same table as Rowan for the last time. But this time, I wouldn't be a pawn in his game. I put on my simplest yet most confidence-boosting outfit. Applied light makeup. I wouldn't look like a broken, crying woman. He didn't deserve that. By 7 p.m., I was back at my house. The moment I stepped inside, I scanned the space. These walls were no longer a home to me. In the corner of the living room stood furniture Rowan and I had picked out together. In the kitchen, his favorite coffee mug sat on the counter. But none of it held meaning for me anymore. 'Cause Rowan had never truly been mine in this house. And tonight, for the first time, I'd see him for who he really was. At exactly 7:30 p.m., the door opened. Rowan stepped inside. He wore a gray suit, his usual warm smile plastered on his face. But this time, I knew what lay behind that smile. His eyes met mine. "Hey, sweetie." Something knotted in my stomach, but I didn't let it show. I tilted my head and smiled. "Welcome home." As Rowan shed his jacket, I watched him closely. Was he nervous? On edge? But no. He was completely at ease. That could mean one of two things. Either he thought he hadn't been caught, or he was such a skilled liar that nothing betrayed him. Rowan headed toward the kitchen. "Did you miss me?" I laughed inwardly, but outwardly I just smiled. A little. I could play this game. I could lie to him too. While Rowan poured himself a drink in the kitchen, I placed my phone on the edge of the table. Elena should send the message now. I counted down in my head. 3, 2, 1. Rowan's phone buzzed. He turned his head to glance at the screen, and in that instant, his entire demeanor shifted. His shoulders tensed. The relaxed expression on his face vanished. And there it was, the first time I saw him panic. This was the moment his mask slipped. As he stared at his phone, his face turned ashen. Without lifting his eyes from the screen, he cleared his throat. Then, with forced calm, he slipped the phone into his pocket. He was testing me. Did I know something? I smiled. Is something wrong? Rowan's eyes snapped to mine. What? No. Just something work-related. A lie. He suspected I knew, but he wasn't sure. And in that moment, I had the upper hand for the first time. I stepped closer, wrapping my arms around his neck. I wanted to test the man who deceived me for so long one last time. I looked into his eyes. Everything okay? Rowan averted his gaze. Yes, he was scared. And right then, I realized who the real winner of this game was. Now it was Rowan who was cornered. And this was just the beginning. Rowan's tension was so palpable I could feel the electricity in the air. Elena's message had changed everything. For the first time, he was a piece in my game. But this was only the beginning. Rowan lifted his whiskey glass and downed it in one gulp. His eyes darted toward me with fleeting glances. He was trying to read me. Did I know something? If I did, how much did I know? And most importantly, what was I going to do to him? Rowan had spent his life holding the reins. But now those reins were slipping through my fingers. And in that moment, I decided to move to the second phase of my plan. I calmly raised my wine glass. Rowan? His head snapped up. Yeah, I smiled. Is there something you'd like to tell me? I asked the question while suppressing the rage, pain, and betrayal coursing through my veins. But inside, storms were raging. If he confessed now, if he told me the truth, maybe he'd have a chance. But when Rowan looked at me, I saw a familiar glint in his eyes. He was gearing up to lie. And that's when I knew he wouldn't escape. Rowan tilted his head slightly and spoke in a soft voice. No, sweetie. Why do you ask? A bitter laugh rose in my throat, but I didn't let it out. I narrowed my eyes and shook my head. Just wondering, I said. Rowan had clung to his lie, and that would be his undoing. That night, when Rowan went to the bathroom, he left his phone on the table. Gave me an opening. I picked it up and unlocked it quickly. He hadn't changed the passcode, so he still thought he was safe. I opened his messages. Elena's text was still there, but right below it was a new one sent to her. Why are you cornering me like this? Cora doesn't know anything. We need to keep her out of it. You said you loved me. Why are you doing this now? Seeing it, my hand trembled involuntarily. He was still clinging to his lies, still treating me like a fool. In that moment, I realized Rowan wouldn't walk away from this game on his own. I'd have to end it myself. I put the phone back and went to the kitchen. I gathered the glasses, washed my face calmly, and began waiting for the day I'd unleash the storm inside me completely. But there was one thing I couldn't wait for. I needed to talk to Elena again. The next day, I called Elena. When she answered, her voice was taut. Did Rowan text you? I asked bluntly. After a brief silence, Elena replied, Yes. I rolled my eyes. Did he mention me? No. I laughed. Of course he didn't. He still thought he was in control. I took a deep breath. Then listen to me carefully, Elena. You're done falling for his games too. You need to scare him, not me. Elena's curiosity piqued. What do you want me to do? I smiled. Tonight, call Rowan for a secret meeting. Tell him you need to have a serious talk. I'll show up at that meeting. Elena's breath hitched. Cora, this could get dangerous. No, I said firmly. What's dangerous is him making fools of us for years. Elena fell silent. Then she spoke slowly. All right. When? I glanced at my watch. For my plan to work, everything had to be perfect. Tonight at 9 p.m., tell him to meet you on the terrace at the Beaumont Hotel. Rowan loved that hotel. It was his crime scene, and criminals get caught where they feel safest. That evening, I began preparing for the second phase of my plan. As I got dressed, I looked in the mirror. This face was no longer that of a defeated woman. It was the face of a woman ready to fight. Tonight, for the first time in his life, Rowan would lose complete control. I jumped into my car and drove to the Beaumont Hotel. At exactly 8:50 p.m., I was in the lobby. I approached a hotel employee. Is the terrace open? He smiled and nodded. Yes, ma'am. You're welcome to sit up there if you'd like. I thanked him and headed upstairs. Terrace was quiet. The view was stunning, but I couldn't care less. I wasn't here to admire the scenery. I was here to watch Rowan's downfall. Precisely 9 p.m., the terrace door opened. Rowan stepped in, and his eyes locked first on Elena, then on me. For a split second, I couldn't read his expression. Shock? Anger? Fear? Then that fake smile slid onto his lips. This is a nice surprise. I leaned calmly against the table, never breaking eye contact. I gestured toward Elena. You're making a decision tonight, Rowan. His eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I leaned forward slowly, placing my phone on the table. I unlocked the screen and showed him his latest messages with Elena. Do you still think you can fool me? In that moment, Rowan's face transformed entirely. For the first time, he realized he'd truly lost. This was his end. And I was rising from the ashes of this wreckage. Rowan's face was as white as a sheet. The messages on the screen shattered every lie he'd built up until now. Elena's texts, his fake "I love you" messages to me, his panic, all of it was laid bare. This might have been the first time Rowan Sullivan had no way out. And I was here to witness every second of it. Elena took a deep breath and leaned toward the table we were gathered around. Her voice carried not just anger, but exhaustion. "How long was this nonsense supposed to go on, Rowan?" she whispered. Rowan turned his eyes to her. I could see the turmoil within him. He wanted to say something, but he didn't know which lie to spin next. Finally, the controlled, charismatic man we'd known was gone. Standing before us was a stumbling, cornered figure. Elena didn't even give him a chance to speak before continuing. "You deceived me. You deceived her. But the one you really fooled was yourself, Rowan." There was sorrow in her voice. The remnants of the woman who'd once loved him were fading amidst this wreckage. Rowan shook his head. I never wanted it to be like this. That's what drove me insane. He never wanted it to be like this? I locked my eyes on him. "Then tell me, Rowan, how did you want it to be?" I stepped closer, keeping my voice steady, though the rage inside me bled into every word. "Did you want another life while you already had one? Did you think you could juggle both of us and keep everything under control?" He looked away. There it was. For the first time in his life, words couldn't save him. This time, I just stared at him and waited. I wanted him to lie. 'Cause before I made my final move, I needed to strip his mask away completely. Rowan was calculating everything inside his head. How could he manipulate us? How could he wriggle out of this? But this time, there was no escape. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed. Finally, he found the courage to meet my eyes. "Cora!" My eyes narrowed. This was going to be an apology. It meant nothing. "I can explain," Rowan said. There it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. "I want to hear this," I said. "From your own mouth. Tell me what kind of life you were trying to build." A shadow flickered in his eyes. I didn't want to lose either of you." Elena's breath caught. Hearing that hit her like a blow too. Rowan pressed on. "I thought I'd fallen in love with Elena. But my commitment to you never ended." A laugh surged inside me, but I choked it back in my throat. Commitment? Was commitment living a second life built on lies? "So that's why you had a child?" I asked, my voice laced with trembling mockery. Rowan clenched his jaw. He knew he had nothing left to defend. Elena shut her eyes tightly, then shook her head slowly. "Rowan, you always told me to wait. But the truth is, you never made a choice. You decided for all of us. And now it's our turn to decide for you." When Elena stood up for me against him for the first time, something shifted inside me. This woman wasn't my enemy. We were two victims of the same story. But to Rowan, we were just side characters. And he could no longer be the star of this tale. Elena pulled an envelope from her pocket and placed it on the table. Rowan's face tightened. "What's this?" he asked. Elena smiled. "DNA test results." Rowan held his breath. Elena continued calmly. "I had it officially confirmed. You're the father of my child. And this is ready to be submitted to the court." Rowan narrowed his eyes. "Why did you do this?" Elena lifted her head. For the first time, she stood tall against him. "Because I'm no longer a shadow you can hide in." And then she turned to me. "And neither is Cora." That was my cue to play my final card. I reached into my pocket, pulled out another envelope, and set it on the table. Rowan's eyes narrowed again. "What's that?" I smiled. "Divorce papers." Rowan's face fell. Sign it, Rowan. And if you don't do it quietly, I'll tell the court every detail of your two-faced life. Control was entirely mine now, and Rowan knew it. His hands trembled as he opened the envelope. He skimmed the contents. Then his eyes, filled with desperation, turned to me. But they no longer held any meaning for me. This man had destroyed my life. But tonight I was destroying his. Rowan took a deep breath. And he picked up the pen. He signed. And in that moment, every tie I had to him was severed. Rowan sat frozen at the table. He knew he'd lost me. He knew he'd lost Elena too. But most importantly, he knew the game was over. I stood up. I picked up the envelope with my hand. I looked at Rowan one last time, and I felt a weight lift from within me. Goodbye, Rowan. I turned and walked away. Elena rose to her feet and joined me. Both of us were walking out of his life. That night, as I stepped out of the hotel doors, I looked up at the sky. Everything had changed. But I wasn't the one who'd lost. This hadn't been my story of ruin. This was my story of rebirth.